Do more is a call to action for all Australians to be allies, making the commitment to become more informed, more educated, and more engaged in creating positive change to challenge racism. This conversation series seeks to make change through storytelling. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community, and what we learn through storytelling culture of the longest continuous civilization on the planet. We pay our respect to elders, past and present.
Shelley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tasneem. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm excited to have you here. You have experience where I'm sitting as an interviewer for this program. And I mean, before we get into more about your amazing work, can you tell us what was your experience in conducting interviews on this topic in this format? What did you get out of it?
It was so wonderful to talk to so many like-minded people. It was just a breath of fresh air, and I felt really blessed to be a part of the DoMore campaign. So it was great to be in your position. So I know how happy you're feeling at the moment to be able to talk to so many different people and learn from different people. But I think just looking back at the people that I spoke to, like I spoke to Morgan Mitchell, and it was really enlightening that a young girl in her 20s still feels quite judged when she walks into the room for the colour of her skin, and how she approaches that and how she tries to break down those stereotypes if she's invited to a function where she's to speak. It was really confronting still for me, knowing that that's pretty much how I felt most of my life, that she still feels like that. And it makes me feel like we have so much more to do, that we have this young, beautiful, vibrant person who still feels very judged. So for Morgan, it was about that changing stereotypes, and that education played a huge role. And she's just so wonderful and wise. It was lovely to speak to her. And then I got to speak to this incredible human in Benjamin Law. He said something that really, really stuck with me. It was about, you know, the sooner people can see white, heterosexual, able-bodied people, the better we will be as a country. You know, people don't see white. They'll see every other colour, every other nationality, but they don't see white. And he said that will be what we can move forward when we start to do that, because we can't unsee that. We can't unsee that there are boards and leaderships and television shows just completely full of white people, that we need to make what we see in our world that we live in actually what we see on the streets, represented in people in leadership and power. So that really stuck with me with Benjamin, and he had quite a lot of things that made me laugh. He was great. I loved talking to him. Then I spoke to a completely different person in Nick Natanui, and we spoke about AFL and his impact in the AFL. And he had this real sense of pride about the work that he'd been doing with the West Coast Eagles, and how he knew that the work he'd been doing within the actual corporation was making a change for the people in his team, but also for the supporters and the wider community. And that's really obvious in the way that the West Coast Eagles lead the way, I feel, in the AFL when there is racism. And even before, they're quite proactive. And I liked how he explained that it's really difficult to explain passive and structural racism, that it can be a difficult thing to explain because people can't see it. So they don't really know what you're talking about. So that was really good listening to him talk about that. And the others spoke about that well. Structural racism and passive racism is a huge impact on our lives. And then to recap, like you're doing with me, Tasneem, with Linda Marigolano, where she talked about it's learning and unlearning what we have been taught as a child, and re-looking at the world and acknowledging our thoughts. So that was really powerful. I felt it was great to talk to those people and sort of regroup in my mind as well about where I stand in this space.
Wow, that's a really diverse cohort and so many takeaways.
Yeah,
and
it was.
I'm excited to talk about you, because I know there's going to be numerous takeaways as well. And how about we start from the start? And if I want to talk to you about the insight of the work that you're doing in your role as an Aboriginal education officer, can you tell us, in your experience, what are some of the students that you're engaging with? What are they dealing with?
Well, I work in Victoria. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I just wanted to work with Aboriginal children. I wanted to make sure that I could make an impact for them, for their future, and make sure that I was helping them to be really strong within themselves culturally and to be proud of who they are as an Aboriginal person, and to take that with them into their lives and into their roles as leaders within the Aboriginal community and role models. So that was really important to me. And then to get into the space, and these boys that I'm working with, because it's an all-boys school, they were being told over and over again, because of the colour of their skin, that they didn't look Aboriginal. And so that was just devastating for them to hear it over and over again. And it was impacting how they felt about themselves as young Aboriginal men. So what I needed to talk to were the people that were saying this and were surrounding them, teachers and other students. You are saying to these children that their family doesn't matter, that their kinship doesn't matter, their songlines, their stories of who they are as a person doesn't matter. The colour of your skin doesn't change who you are as a person. So that's been the big thing for me, because I came from South Australia where I was just Aboriginal, and it wasn't something that I understood, because nobody really spoke like that when I grew up. So moving here to Victoria, and I've lived here for 20 years, and I've noticed that because there's a huge impact from government policies and the stolen generation. Victoria is very much impacted by that, and so are these children. So for it still to be impacting on who they are as people, I thought, no, I won't be having that.
I mean, when people make that assertion, oh, you don't look Aboriginal, or you don't look as Aboriginal as everybody else, what do you think is informing that statement? What do you think the intentions are behind it?
I think it's come, I could be wrong, but I think it comes from the government, probably in the mid-90s, when they decided to let the world know that all the Aboriginal people lived up in the Northern Territory. So there was a big, huge campaign. That's where everybody lived. People still to this day flood to Australia and run up to the top of Australia to see Aboriginal people, because that's where they are. And I think that has impacted Australia as well. They forget that Australia is full of Aboriginal people of all shades of colour, of all different cultural, and we're quite diversity within all of tribal groups. So it's I think that has played a massive role still to this day.
So it's about reclaiming your identity and asserting it for what it is, as opposed to what was miscommunicated by the government so long ago. And that is still their legacy. Wow. Not a small feat to undertake. What are you seeing from the educational sector as an educator about the way Australian history is being taught, and in particular in the way that First Nations are being represented now as, say, maybe 20 years ago?
I do believe we are 100% in a better place. It's embedded within the curriculum. The problem is that the teachers that are teaching it wasn't taught to them at school. So they're not confident and they're not comfortable with teaching it. So the other problem with our national curriculum is you can choose. You don't actually have to do a lot of the things. You can go, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do that. So you, as a teacher, you choose often what you're very comfortable with teaching. So teachers are leaving a large component of Aboriginal history and culture out of the curriculum. So there are children, like I know children that are 18 that don't know about the stolen generation, don't know about government policies and the impact, that have just left school, and they never even talked about Aboriginal people within school. So that's still a huge problem. We need to further educate our teachers, make them comfortable in what's happening, and that will flow on to our children understanding their own history of this country.
So you're saying that even if the education syllabus does mandate a particular area of learning to be rolled out, the teachers can opt out of teaching it?
Yeah, they can, because it's such a vast curriculum. We have curriculum priorities where you have to teach about Aboriginal history and culture, and then we have it filtered within the curriculum. But if you don't want to, if you tick another box within a certain area, you don't have to do the other parts of that curriculum, because there's just so much. You can touch it lightly, or you can go quite deep with something, and that happens. I've been working for 20 years. I know it happens because I've seen it all the time.
Well, I was going to ask you, can you give me some examples of where you've seen the education on First Nations history being done well, and what does that look like?
It looks like it is embedded. It's in everything. It's in every day. It's not this standalone unit that is just, okay, on term 2, we will do Aboriginal history and culture. And then in 2 years' time, we will do Aboriginal history and culture again for 4 weeks in a unit. It's embedded within the curriculum. You walk around the school, you can see that it is part of the culture of the school. You can hear the children talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You can see their sense of pride about that. You can feel it in the air, and you can see it around the walls of the school. So there's a big difference to a school that's doing it every 2 years to a school that's doing it every day.
Okay, and this is sort of slightly off, a bit tangential here, but there's a national broadcaster that has recently started in its news reporting mentioning what land they're speaking from, and
Yes.
saying that land in language. Do you think that's the kind of embedded reality and embedded progress that we want to be seeing?
Absolutely, it is. It's the kind of thing, and Australia Post has recently done that too, by encouraging us to put the country that you are sending your letter from and to the country that it's actually going. You know, so I would put here in Melbourne that it's from the Kulin Nations, and if it's going, you know, to another place, I would put that the nation in which it's going to as well. So we're seeing more of that, because when people first came to Australia, they changed all of the names. So they erased 65,000 years of history by changing a name, as simple as that. And we need to start acknowledging that these places had Aboriginal names, and they have a long history, and that needs to be recognised. So it makes a huge difference if people start thinking like that.
That's so powerful. I mean, the impact of what a name is. Look, in terms of young people and young people entering the education system and for the first time being exposed to, history of the First Nations people, what are some of the key takeaways that you think, if there's like a top, 3 or 4 points that you really want them to take away? I mean, what would you emphasise if you were Minister of Education and you had that magic wand and you could dictate the scope of what the curriculum was going to look like? What are the 3 to 4 takeaways that are absolutely not negotiable?
I would want the children to understand the choices that the government made with past policies and how they have impacted Aboriginal people, and why you don't sit next to many Aboriginal people, or if any Aboriginal people within your classroom, on the bus, and why that is. I would want them to really understand that. I would also want them to understand the effects of racism and the different types of racism and how they affect long-term with people. And I'd want them to really understand the history and the beauty within our culture, and for them to embrace it as theirs. They're Australian. As Aboriginal history and culture is theirs too. It's everybody in this country. And, we all know different things, but we need to embrace it, and we need to see the beauty, because there's so much beauty that is not seen.
That's such a positive angle to flip it from. So that's incredible. And I think that's a perfect segue also into the area of what your personal activism is, Shelley. So can you tell us a little bit more about how activism has shaped your career, both formally and informally?
Yeah. So I had this fantastic role model in my father, Bob Ware, who spent his whole life being quite active within the Aboriginal community, and it was all that I saw. So all I saw was that we have to do more for our people because we have a better future. It was ingrained in me as a young girl. So that's how I live. What can I do to make sure these children have a better life? So that's all I do. I do it with the way that I teach the children. I do it with my son in the way I speak to him, the way I talk to my friends, the way that I will talk to the media, everything about it. I try to be something.
Conscious activism.
Conscious activism, absolutely. It's a conscious and constant thing that I do, and it's just who I am. It's just the way that I was raised. My dad actually, he made me promise that I wasn't to be quite an outspoken activist until my son was of an age where he would understand, because it takes away from your family life when you do these things. And he wanted me to make sure that my son was a strong and confident young man with himself, and he knew who he was as a person, as an Aboriginal person and as a young man, and what his role was in his future life. So I had to make sure that he was well and he was safe before I did. So I have only really stood up, to be quite public in probably the last 12 months. And it was actually my son Taj who said, it's time for you to say something, because I had not said things for a few years and it had started to affect my well-being. And he said to me, I'm not going to let people treat me the way that you've been letting people treat you. You need to start standing up and doing something about this. And so with that, I went, bang, it's time.
It's fun, isn't it? You need permission from your children sometimes to
Yes.
to shine like that. And I mean, what did that transition from informal to formal activism look like when you took it up a notch and you could actually be outspoken? How did that manifest?
Well, I have these beautiful sisters in the Outer Sanctum sisters, and we talk a lot. We talk about all different things, about everything you could possibly imagine about the world, the right and the wrong in the world. And one of them is Dr. Kate Sear. And I was speaking to her and I was saying, what can I do? And she said, write a letter to the Attorney General. And I said, oh, can you do that? She goes, sure you can. And then I said, well, I'm just a teacher with dyslexia. How would I even write this letter? And she said, I'll help you. So she helped me formulate this letter. She put my thoughts into this letter. And then it transitioned to our letter. And it became myself and an ally writing this letter of, we want social media racism to stop. We're not doing enough about this. It was impacting my life. And working within the AFL space, I would see it over and over again. And it fell into calling out racism, but then nothing happened. Nothing happening on social media. You know what it's like when you call racism on social media. You get back from the platform that says, this doesn't quite fit under our racial vilification law. And you're like, hang on a minute. If that doesn't, then we need to reassess this. So we wrote this letter. We had 100 signatories. And we said, this is what we would like to see. We would like to see consequences. We would like to see education as actually our big component of it. And this is how it impacts people. And we talked about a lot of that. And she wrote a pretty impressive letter with my thoughts in there. I was quite taken aback because she's a pretty smart cookie, okay. But the letter went off and we got a response. And he said that he's actually writing a new act for social media, and that the act will now include a $100,000 fine, and that it will relate to what happens in the real world, on land, essentially. So the Racial Discrimination Act that is already existing will now apply to social media with up to 7 years jail. So this is all actually being worked on at the moment. And he thanked us for our thoughts and thanked us for, letting him know how it impacts us in our daily lives. And I mean, it was a very political kind of response, but it had a lot of hope in that letter, and it felt good, and it got a lot of media traction. There were weeks that it was in newspapers and on radio and blogs and things. So there were a lot of people talking about it. So it was great.
That's brilliant. I mean, you basically self-propelled your own KPI, and you ticked it off. I mean, that's good. I said, okay, Taj, I can do that. I'll take that notch. What's next? What's next on your agenda? So I'm going to keep going with that and having conversations with him and talking about, the space and really engaging with other people. I've had a lot of people come forward and want to talk about this. And I mean, the DoMore campaign came from that letter. They were interested in my voice and what I wanted to say about racism. Did you find, so was this like a petition, and this is the petition that you set up, did you find that people were willing, and was it an easy sell, or did you have to really campaign hard to get people on board?
We got 100 signatories in, was 48 hours.
Wow.
There as a range, we got Stan Grant to Adam Goods to Supreme Court judges, to lawyers, to my girlfriend who's a librarian, to my brother who's a diesel mechanic. We wanted a scope that represented Australia, all different nationalities, everybody of all diverse backgrounds. And we wanted them to know that this is how we feel as people, and we want you to hear our voice. And he listened, and his response was actually, it was political, but at the same time there was certainly an understanding of how we were being impacted.
That's incredible, Shelley. And I can hear the passion in what you do. Inspired both by the permission from your son to shine and obviously from your dad's direction about when to start doing things. I mean, is there anyone else that inspires you and that you consider aspirational when you get out there into the field and you do your activism thing? I mean, who are you channeling?
Well, I'm all about our youth. So I'm literally channeling our youth. I'm trying to be better for them. And everything I do, I can't express enough, is literally for them. I want them to see and be able to be whatever they want to be. I want a better world for them. So everything is about them.
But are there particular young people that you look at and think, wow, okay, these ones have got it right? And what besides yourself, who I consider to be an amazing role model. I mean, do you look around and see other young people and think, yeah, this is great. This gives me hope?
Oh yeah. I can't believe the next generation. Like I'm so empowered by how strong they are as young people. And when I was speaking to Morgan Mitchell, I was never like that in my 20s. You know, I was so shy, and they are so strong and forward, and I see them all the time, and they've just got all these beautiful, strong voices, and it's just, there's so many of them, and it just brings me so much hope. And yeah, they blow me away.
Look, I think it's important to find that circle that nurtures you and who inspires you and motivates you, to make you, I guess, to reassure you that, you know, you're doing the right thing. But I mean, I guess the flip side of that reality is the naysayers, the ones who you have petitioned, the reasons that informed your petition, those ones that go against you and try to put you in your lane. All right. How do you manage those dissenters?
How? They don't get to put me in my lane anymore. I let them do it for far too long, and it won't be happening anymore. I won't encourage anybody. You know, I've even heard myself say, sometimes we just can't say that. No, sometimes we can't do that, like as a young person, because we were stepping out of our lane and there wasn't a place for us to go. So I feel like the Black Lives Matter campaign has enabled us to have a stronger voice as people of colour, and the Me Too movement, that gave me the voice as a woman. So I've lived through those two massive changes within our whole global community, and they have been the difference to how I speak now. And we have got the opportunity to get out of our lane, not the one that they keep trying to push us into. So that's I don't have time for that anymore, and I don't encourage anyone to stay in their lane anymore either.
Good for you. Well, I'm going to get a little bit personal here, and I want to talk about the R word. I want to talk about racism. And I mean, you grew up in South Australia, and you're here in Melbourne now. I mean, the Australia that you grew up in, would you have called that a white Australia at the time? And has it changed? And if it hasn't changed, or if whether or not it has changed, what does that look like for you? What does that look like? What's the experience of that like for you now?
Yeah, the white Australia that I grew up in very much was very white. You know, children wouldn't play with me because I was Aboriginal. You know, like I had to conform, very much had to conform within a space to be acceptable. And I constantly heard, but you're not like the other Aboriginal people. You're not really Aboriginal. So that was pretty much my whole entire, probably to my 20s, that's how people spoke to me. You're not really Aboriginal. I felt really Aboriginal. So I wasn't sure for a really long time. I couldn't really work out where they were getting this information from. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realised it was the stereotypes that we were actually listening to, and they were allowing them to form judgments on Aboriginal people. But at the same time, they were putting me in another box where I'm not really like the other Aboriginal people, so I can still think those horrible things about those other Aboriginal people, but Shelley's not really like them, so she's more like us. So that was pretty much who I was as a child and growing up in Australia and what it was like. But, you know, I was very connected, or still am very connected to my Aboriginal culture and history. You know, I would go to school holidays and we would just be, you know, camping and hunting and, gathering berries and beautiful Aboriginal traditional foods, and that was my whole entire childhood. So I had that mix of those two worlds that I lived in, and so it could become very difficult at times. But as an adult, I see all this beautiful diversity, so I don't have to listen to those voices anymore. You know, I'm strong in who I am, and I love all of the different nationalities that we have in Australia, and I get to embrace all the beauty within their cultures. So those voices have faded, but they had a huge impact on who I was as a person growing up. But I still think it's an issue with people who choose to continue to listen to stereotypes. And I think as an Australian society, we need to check our stereotypes. We need to listen to the voices in our head and make sure they're not voices we want to listen to, one, or the voice that we want to come out of our mouth. So Australia needs to do better in that situation still to this day.
Absolutely. And when you talk about stereotypes, these are obviously informed through media, through imaging, and through people's, they could be generational. This is what we've been taught. This is what my family's been saying. Therefore, that's what my kids are going to be brought up with. And the only way to counter that, obviously, is through education. And so clearly the role that you're playing as an educator in this space is crucial. But for those adults who are past, the education sector, what are some creative ways you think of impacting that change in, destroying the stereotypes and flipping them and actually subverting them and saying, no, this is the reality. So education sector has got to work with one cohort of Australia, but for the cohort that are at the decision-making tables, who are on the boards, who are the media execs, the politicians, how do you effectively deal with those?
It's about having conversations, hard conversations. I'll have conversations. I do a lot of public speaking. And when I have them, it's so often at the end, I'll have people come up and say, oh, thank you for not being angry. Thank you for not, for making me feel comfortable about what's happening and being so kind and generous. Well, I am a little angry, actually, what has happened to my people and what continues to happen to people, of diversity in Australia. But there is a real sense that we have to tread so lightly with these people, because if you push too hard, they don't listen, they stop listening. So for me, it's about making sure that we have those conversations, the hard conversations, making people feel uncomfortable, but also pushing with education and promoting self-education. If these people don't self-educate, the internet is full of the most amazing information. Go to your local bookstore, ask them if they haven't got books about whatever you want to learn about in diversity in Australia. Talk to them about what you want to learn about. They have a network that they can bring these books in. You'll change the way they bring books into their shop as well. Create that space. But those conversations just need to be had.
I just want to touch on what you talked about there about being angry and how, we don't have space to be angry sometimes because people get offended by that and they're not going to be as receptive to that. And I guess there's the whole argument of those who are having to carry the burden of educating others, right?
Yeah.
And does that wear on you at some point? And if it does wear on you, and I'm guessing, I'm making an educated guess, that it can be weary to constantly have to be on the educating side and to deal with people's hyperreactions and hypersensitivity and tears and all the rest of that does come through. How do you manage that?
Okay. So I work with a great group of people and we do a lot of teacher training. So we go to schools and as a group, we balance it by making sure that, one day I might be talking about the hard issues and then the next day I might be teaching basket weaving. So, we balance in the way that we look after ourselves and the way that, because if you don't look after your well-being, you can, one, get very angry, very bitter, and it can wear on your own emotional and mental well-being. So you have to check that and make sure that you're in a place where you can be generous to other people to help educate them. It can't always be take. People have to give you time and space as well to heal, because you can watch a documentary yourself and be very angry about something that has happened, but for us it's like reliving that documentary over and over again. We've got to keep telling people what has happened and we go and educate, and we want to do that. We want this to change because there wasn't an education, especially for the older generation of Australians. So it's like a job almost. I feel like I have to do it. Otherwise, it's not going to make it better for these younger generations. But there are times you just definitely have to look after yourself and your own well-being.
Do you think there are enough support mechanisms in place for activists like yourself who are out there on the front line, who are doing the really, cold-faced work of dealing with often racist attitudes in people, to educate them so that they know better, so they do better, even though they do have the ability to educate themselves? Do you think there are enough support resources around for you, or do you just find them?
I don't think there are any. Not that I'm aware of. I just call them friends. I have great friends that I can either debrief with or send a little funny meme about something that's happened. We'll have a bit of a giggle and laugh something off. Or really, for me, it's about taking a break. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I will certainly take a social media break. And then I will take a break of what I'm doing in my life and try to do something new and fun. Make sure I get some belly laughs in the day.
That sounds like a very healthy plan and balancing things out. Well done, absolutely. And I'll just, as we close, you talked about your allies and your friends that help you get through. And you mentioned some young people as well. Going forward for young Indigenous Australians who are looking to get into the activism space, what advice would you give them to help them navigate through what can be a minefield sometimes of success, but exhaustion.
Yeah.
Based on yeah.
I would say do what my father said to me. Do this conscious
activism
that you're doing. You know, the conscious activism and living and being is a beautiful way to live. Like, I did that. I made beautiful friends. I made a beautiful life for myself. Yeah, it was probably a little harder sometimes to kick down doors, but it enabled me to have a really strong family and a strong family unit. And I know that my son is well. But at the same time, if you're ready to go and you're ready to go early, you need to make sure that you're looking after yourself and you surround yourself with good people. You provide yourself with the time to have a break, and it's okay to say no. And you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do every single event that everybody asks you to do. If you don't feel comfortable in something, don't do it. If you want to go with one angle of something, like I want racism to stop. Like, I want it gone. But I've chosen to go with the angle of social media racism because I believe that's where everybody spends their time, on the phone, you know, and I think that will bleed out into the rest of society. If you have to stop and think in your social media world, and if it is just the consequence that stops you for now, I'm okay with that. You know, it's also the same consequence that stops people from speeding. People change those zones, you know, that 40 zone change to 60 to 40. People slam on those brakes because they know the consequences. So if that's what's stopping people right now, I'm okay with that. But what will change is the way they think, their mindset will change. And then that will bleed into society. So that's what I've chosen. I've pinpointed a place where I want to be. I can't solve all of the problems. So that was probably another thing. If you're ready to go, go for it. A lot of people are stronger than me. I mean, I'm pretty strong, but that's come from years of, unfortunately, racism that I build walls up against.
So, Shelley, again, I'm giving you a magic wand here. And if you get the magic wand and you could fix everything that you could fix, what would life in the world look like for First Nations people in this country in, say, 10 years' time?
Appreciated and valued, and their voice heard. I think, like I said, we've got so much beauty within our culture, and there's just so much, you know, the way that we look after Mother Earth and the way that we care for future generations and the way that we care for each other. You know, there's value in that, and there's a lot of love. And I hope that people can start to see that, not just what the media tells people about Aboriginal people, and that we can get rid of those stereotypes.
Shelley, thank you so much for giving of your time and your insights, and just being so vulnerable about everything that you have gone through. It's been educative, but it's actually been quietly inspiring to appreciate that, you know, being angry has its place, being strategic has its place, and being creative. So I think the viewers of this are going to be so much more enriched. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, beautiful. Thank you for listening and hearing.
Find ways you can do more at domoreproject.com.au.